This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Welcome to our Fireside Chat. We're delighted you've joined us this evening. We're blessed to have two gifted women of God who are going to share with us this hour of power about the importance of being fully aware of this illness known as Alzheimer's. But before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Gracious and glorious God, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to glean from these two who are now working diligently to make sure that people are aware of this illness known as Alzheimer's. We pray, oh God, that this conversation might be strengthening to your people. We ask thy blessings upon those who are dealing with the illness, as well as the many caretakers. Bless us, we pray. Amen. Christina and Kelly, we're delighted you've joined us this evening. And here in Bethlehem, we are seeking to have a holistic ministry. And part of that ministry, obviously, is our well-being of our bodies, our minds, and this illness that has really gripped the hearts of so many families. And how can we become more aware of some of the symptoms? But before you do that, tell us more about your organization and what you seek to do.
Absolutely. So the Alzheimer's Association, we're the Delaware Valley chapter, and we're a nonprofit organization, and our goal is to raise awareness in the community, provide support and care to families, and to advocate for advancements in treatments and to raise funds for research so that we can find a cure one day.
So what is your actual role?
So my role is program manager. And so I cover some part of southeastern Pennsylvania and a little in the state of Delaware. And so I work to educate the community, raise awareness, build relationships with community partners and organizations, and recruit and mentor volunteers so that we can expand access and reach into the community.
So Kelly, what is your actual role?
My role with the Delaware Valley chapter is Associate Director of Programs, and I do a lot of the same work that Christina does in communities in Southeast PA, and then I also oversee our volunteer recruitment and management and some of our regional and statewide partnerships as well.
Well, we're glad to partner with the organization because we realize that we cannot do it by ourselves, and we realize we need more information as well as inspiration. So I recently read an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer regarding how African Americans are more subject to have this illness. Do you have any knowledge regarding that?
So African Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. We know that some factors regarding that are because of health, socioeconomic factors, access to health care that impact that increased risk, and cardiovascular disease also being more prevalent.
Would you also say that African Americans are striving to become more knowledgeable about this illness as well as other ethnicities?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can you also tell us in your own words how some of those illnesses can be detected?
Yeah, so some of the 10 warning signs?
Yes.
Absolutely. So there are 10 warning signs. They don't necessarily mean that someone has Alzheimer's, but what they do is they indicate there's something going on. So there's a need for a doctor's visit to find out what is going on. So they have memory loss that disrupts daily life. So that's not just occasionally forgetting something, but it's occasionally forgetting something and having that be more frequently over time and not remembering later. So when you remember later, that's a good sign, but when you don't remember later, that's more of a warning sign. Trouble completing familiar tasks. So that chocolate chip cookie recipe for the holidays that families always made, suddenly it's trouble completing that. Get a cup of flour. And, oh wait, how many cups of flour was it? And going back and forth and back and forth. Or having trouble programming the microwave or using the DVD player. Confusion with time or place. Confusing the seasons. Not understanding an event if it's a wedding coming up, if it's someone's talking about it and it's 2 months from now, the person might not understand and think that it's happening right now or about to happen. Is it difficulty completing familiar tasks? I mentioned that one already. Want to grab a few there, Kelly?
Sure. Some of the other warning signs, we often notice individuals who are struggling with symptoms may start to withdraw socially. If they have some level of self-awareness, that they're starting to struggle or maybe have lapses in their memory. They may withdraw from social activities or hobbies and things that they've always enjoyed. I think here at Bethlehem Baptist, you may notice some individuals who come faithfully every Sunday and participate in a lot of activities, and all of a sudden they're not coming anymore because they don't want someone else to notice or catch them making a mistake or forgetting something. So they start to withdraw. We also see personality and mood changes oftentimes in individuals. That's another symptom. And a lot of the personality and mood changes really are rooted in fear, the emotional fear of the changes that they're experiencing. And so they become very defensive or they have a shorter fuse, so to speak. So we see mood and personality changes as well.
So I've heard stories where persons become verbally abusive. Is that something that is also common?
It can be. We do have, thankfully, I believe not as often, but we do have individuals who may become verbally or physically aggressive. And again, how we educate caregivers is to look for things that are happening in the person's environment that are triggering that reaction. Because someone who is verbally or physically aggressive is responding to a situation in their environment that's making them uncomfortable, making them fearful. And so is there something going on, whether it be a person or a place or the environment is too overwhelming in that moment? What is causing them to act out? It's almost like a fight or flight response to something that's making them uncomfortable.
These last 2 years, as we've been dealing with this virus, we hear a lot about mental health. Have you seen an increase in those who are dealing with the effects of Alzheimer's at this point in terms of depression or those kind of things? Is there a connection between mental health and Alzheimer's?
There's definitely an increase in depression, I would say, in many people. So especially someone who wasn't diagnosed with Alzheimer's yet, but has those symptoms. And then especially with caregivers, definitely being isolated. Many caregivers who were having care come into the home or family members come into the home to help out just stopped, wouldn't allow anyone to come into the home. So they have that increased burden of it's only themselves being the caregiver. So that isolation, that depression, definitely impacting mental health and decline for the caregiver and the person with the diagnosis.
And I believe the pandemic also impacted individuals with a diagnosis again for some of the same reasons. Someone who has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia doesn't have the same reasoning or logic skills that most of us have. So when their family stopped coming to visit because they couldn't, the person with dementia doesn't understand why. And so the individuals with the diagnosis also became very isolated. And we did see statistically an increase in decline in those individuals because they weren't able to continue the activities that keep them thriving during the pandemic.
I really appreciate this conversation. I grew up when cancer was not a word that was readily used. People didn't talk about it, got the big C, and obviously now with so much research that cancer is not as secretive as it used to be. On the other hand, it seems as though Alzheimer's is very secretive. People don't talk about it. Maybe sometimes people feel embarrassed. What is your thought process there?
It's definitely in many communities where it is kept very secretive, kept close to the heart, to the family, not shared. That's part of what we want to do. We want to raise that awareness and know, Alzheimer's is not a mental illness. It's not something that we want to break that stigma and have people be aware of it and know that it's okay to get help. Just like if our knee is injured or our heart is injured, we take care of that. So when our brain is injured or has an illness, we take care of that as well. And it's not, there shouldn't be stigma around that.
So when you say help, what kind of help is offered to the patient?
So help in that they can connect with others who have a diagnosis. They can reach out and do planning early. They can get support through resources of support groups for the individual with the diagnosis or for the caregiver. So those types of resources to help them live the best quality life while they're diagnosed.
So tell me about caretakers, because I think that also puts a tremendous amount of strain in terms of aging persons who may be caring for their spouse or caring for a parent. What kind of resources do you have for caretakers?
Well, I'd say our most important resource is our 24/7 helpline. So that's 1-800-272-3900. And so it's available 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So it's there for emotional support for those caregivers. If their loved one is up at 2 in the morning asking repetitive questions and they just need to talk to someone, they can call the helpline at 2 in the morning. If they need disease information to learn more about, what is going on with these warning signs, is this something I should be concerned about? What do I do these next steps? They can call for that. They need tips on caregiving. They're not sure what to do or where to go. They can talk with a master's level clinician, a care consultant, and help them plan out what are these next few steps. Where do we go from here? What are the specific situations and around, or specific things around my individual situation? They can help them go through that. So the helpline is that most important resource. We have education programs. Researchers show that caregivers or caretakers who educate themselves feel less stressed. Not that they won't feel stressed at all, but they'll feel less stressed. So we have education right now on Zoom. We do have some in-person educations. Coming up right at the North Wales Area Library in January 2020, we'll have a 3-part series on Wednesday evenings. Like I said, we have them on Zoom and then on demand. So e-learning, you can watch it right in your own home, anytime you want, turn on, turn off. And then support groups. So we have virtual support groups and in person, and I know it's something that's a wonderful part of the Precious Memory Ministry here at Bethlehem Baptist Church is the Alzheimer's Association Caregiver Support Group. And so I believe it meets on the fourth Thursday?
Right.
Fourth
Yeah.
Thursday
Fourth
at 7
Thursday.
p.m. And so that's a great resource for members of the congregation as well as the whole community, and that's virtual right now.
I really am appreciative of Deacon Dolores Parks and those who are working in that area. Unfortunately, still a lot of people are reluctant to come forward, very secretive and personal. Also tell us in your own words in terms of, is there any medication that patients take? I notice I've heard people say that they may have had a previous illness and they had taken medication, but now this is compound with that and they're not always taking their medication. So how do you deal with that?
Well, there are medications that are generally prescribed for a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And one thing we didn't mention yet is that, dementia is an umbrella that addresses a very broad spectrum of symptoms. And so there are many different types of dementia, Alzheimer's being just one of them. So if you, for example, Parkinson's is a form of dementia. You may have Parkinson's and you may take a different medication for Parkinson's. But in terms of Alzheimer's disease, there are some basic medications that have been around for over a decade. Aricept is probably the most commonly prescribed that most people might be familiar with. And those medications, unfortunately, only treat the symptoms of the disease. They don't really address the underlying pathology of the disease. So the medications that are more commonly prescribed today for Alzheimer's are not going to alter the course or the progression of the disease. But they do help a person to maintain their independence and functioning for as long as possible.
Is the illness hereditary?
So there's 2 types of Alzheimer's. So what you typically think of when you hear Alzheimer's is later onset Alzheimer's. It's when it's diagnosed 65 and older. That one, there's a gene associated with it that's a risk gene, just one risk factor. So having that first degree relative, a parent or a sibling, increases that risk a little bit. But so does age. Age is our biggest risk factor. So does heart disease or any things that affect the heart. So they're risk factors. The other type of Alzheimer's is younger onset or early onset Alzheimer's. So it's diagnosed prior to the age of 65 and progresses a bit more rapidly. And that one, when there's a gene associated with it, it's the deterministic gene. So if you inherit that gene, then you do get it. Typically, it's when it's in the family. Sometimes there's rare cases when someone didn't know it was in their family.
What has led you to become involved in this organization?
Well, for me, I've had 3 family members, if not more, who have been impacted by it. I've had my most recent was my grandmother, who passed away just about 10 years ago now. It doesn't seem like 10 years, but 10 years ago. And that actually led me to, when I was in college, to intern with the Alzheimer's Association out in Ohio because of how it was affecting her. And I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to work in that community to help make a difference.
What about you?
Well, for myself, I've been in nonprofit work for the past 25 plus years. And interestingly, I do have family members. I do have a personal connection to the disease. My mother actually has Parkinson's. And then I have an uncle who has late stage Alzheimer's right now. But for me, interestingly, I was working with a different nonprofit many years ago. And one of my board volunteers, his mother-in-law, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and he actually referred me to the association because he knew they were looking for someone in the local office. And so, interestingly, I came there through a volunteer referral who thought I would be good at doing the work for the association. And that's what brought me to the association. And that was almost 18 years ago now.
At the end of the day, how do you feel at the end of the day after working with families and things of that nature? How do you feel? Do you feel stressed at times yourself, or?
You know what, I think day-to-day work can cause stress for anyone in any job, but I think it's not when I interact with a family or do an education program that I feel stressed. That's when I feel the most rewarding part of my job. Is I've had that in one-to-one interaction. That's actually what recharges me and refreshes me, is individual interactions with families and helping them where they, after a program or after a phone call, they feel less stressed. They feel like they know where to go.
What about yourself, even though you have 2 family members? How does that?
I would say that I would agree with Christine. I don't really find the work stressful outside of normal work stress. I don't think I can say within the past 18 years that I've ever had a day when I haven't felt that I've had an opportunity to help someone, whether it be someone with a diagnosis, whether it be a caregiver, whether it be a partner in the community. So again, like Christina said, I think the work for us is very rewarding, and most, if not all days, there is always a takeaway that someone's day has been made better. And I think we continue our work also with a lot of hope for the future, with research that's going on, and with the progress that I know I personally feel in a lot of the things we've been talking about in increasing awareness and increasing education and bringing all people in our communities who are impacted by this disease to a point where they are comfortable talking about it and getting help.
So you feel optimistic that hopefully soon there'll be some relief or some kind of medication that will help eradicate some of this illness?
I do.
Do you feel that way?
There's a lot going on in research right now. And I would say it's a great segue to mention that I do believe we also need more diversity in research. So if we are going to be able to understand how a disease affects a specific population based on history and makeup and cultural competency, we need representation from all communities in research as well. I believe right now, when you look at research and clinical trials across the board, most of your participants are Caucasian. And that doesn't represent the African American community, it doesn't represent the Hispanic Latino community, and so we do need more diversity in research and more participation from people of color in research as well.
Tell us about the forum you're having in January.
Absolutely. So coming up the end of January, we're still finalizing that date, we're going to be having an Alzheimer's community forum, specifically for residents and families of Montgomery County. And the idea of the community forum is to assess the needs of Montgomery County. What is needed here, rather than dumping a whole bucket of services. What is truly needed. So we'll be having a community forum, about 90 minutes, and we'll do a short education, about 20 minutes, about what is the disease, what's the impact in the community. And then we're going to be asked questions, kind of a town hall style, and find out, where does this community go for its health news and information? What top programs or services would this community like to see implemented over the next year? What community leaders should we be working with to make sure we have the biggest impact in reaching people in the community? And a variety of different questions. And the goal is to assess those needs, and then with some partners in the community, and then take those information that we learn and create a plan of action and implement that in the community over the next year.
So you really have me thinking, and I want to go back to your question again about diversity. Mm-hmm. And would you agree that unfortunately this pandemic has really placed so much emphasis upon the vaccine and all the things that go with that, as well as the increasing violence in our city and everything else, that this illness has been pushed, I guess, under the rug to some degree? It's not getting as much attention as it should. Would there be any merit in saying that?
I don't know if I can speak directly to that. Certainly the pandemic has changed priorities for a lot of individuals over the course of the past year and a half. And I can say, at the Alzheimer's Association, we take the pandemic, we take the health and safety of our constituents and our communities very seriously. Because we deal with such a vulnerable population. The seniors themselves who are diagnosed, as well as the caregivers who are facing a lot of a stressful burden. I don't know if, I guess maybe we're not getting, maybe Alzheimer's is not getting as much attention with the pandemic, but we're still out every day, reaching out and contacting individuals and, trying to keep that awareness level up and make sure that people are getting to the services and resources that they need.
Yeah. Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, it's not a conversation that we hear, even as relates to cancer and some other illnesses, those who are diabetic, and how do we continually get this information across that it's important that we know the facts. So let me ask you another question. What is the length, when you say seniors, so what is the length of time in terms of how long a person lives with this illness? Do you have any kind of statistics with that?
Yeah, so average is around 8 years.
8?
However, it can be anywhere from 2 to 20 years. It's quite a wide range. So if someone's very physically healthy otherwise, they could be in that later part, that around 20 years, 15 years, living with the disease. But if they have a lot of other comorbidities and other health conditions, it could be on the shorter side.
Is there any, well, there's several places. We have several persons. I think there's a place called, is it Symphony? It's right off of St. Line Avenue, where they have persons who have memory loss and things of that nature. Are there other facilities like that where people go and receive that kind of care?
Throughout the whole Delaware Valley area, there's independent livings, assisted livings or personal care, skilled nursing cares out there, along with home care and adult day centers, providing all forms of respite for individuals, for caregivers, and then for individuals with the diagnosis. So definitely care out there. I know you were talking about raising that awareness and bringing the awareness in the community. And one way to really do that is when we have leaders in the community or families that are dealing with it, come out and share their story and break that stigma. And by sharing that story, it makes others feel more comfortable, and then for them, they're more willing to talk about it. And as people talk about it more, people will start to reach out for help and support each other and make it something that's talked about in the community versus being hidden.
So recently in Philadelphia, just had Alzheimer's Walk.
Yes.
Yeah. Were you part of that? as well. Was that done by your organization?
Yeah, so it's our largest walk. So it's at Citizens Bank Park. It was on the 12th, 13th. That Saturday.
That Saturday.
Saturday. I think it's September or November 13th.
Trying to remember what day of the week that was.
It's our walk to end Alzheimer's. And like I said, it's our largest walk here in the Delaware Valley area. And absolutely, that was our organization raising awareness. We had about 5,000 people come out in person, although there were many more that chose to walk in their neighborhoods and in their community on separate days while supporting the overall walk to end Alzheimer's.
And our Philadelphia walk is one of the largest in the country.
Yeah. We have you might not know Arden Reed, who used to be on television, and unfortunately she has illness, and her daughter walked that day, and we supported the walk in that regard. And it's constantly talking about awareness and the stigma also that people don't want people to know. So it's a challenge.
I think Christina had mentioned previously. It's amazing to me that in 2021 we still have the level of stigma that we do around Alzheimer's and other dementias. And I know I have this conversation so often with individuals in the community about being able to separate and differentiate a disease process like dementia from mental illness. And I think a lot of the stigma is because of the confusion of the two, where many decades ago people didn't talk about dementia because they considered it a mental illness, and if a loved one had dementia they were crazy, and they hid them in the house, and that stigma still lingers today. But if we can get individuals to understand that it is a disease process that's happening in the brain that is out of anyone's control, and that we can treat it and manage it like we do diabetes or heart disease or cancer or any other chronic illness or disease. And I try to get individuals to focus on the quality of life. That's really what we're working toward, is until we can cure the disease, until we can actually stop it from progressing, what we need to do right now is manage it and be able to give that person the best quality of life, and that they can still live with Alzheimer's disease just like they live with cancer, just like they live with diabetes, and helping them to do that.
I try to be open in terms of my mind. And I think, again, that sometimes when we are unaware of a particular illness, we make fun about it. So here again, and not to come across to be self-righteous, but I can't find my keys. I must be getting, So we're making a joke about it, and that may be our way of dealing with it, but it also shows a little sensitive. Not being sensitive. You understand what I'm trying to say? That because we don't know, we tend to make fun as opposed to, it's nothing to laugh about. Could be early signs. I can't find my keys, or something of that nature. And I guess that's our way of coping, I'm not sure. But how do we get people to become a little bit more sensitive about some of the things we laugh about or speak about, or using the word crazy again? That is certainly not something you would say to your parent or to someone you love. You don't want to do that, but that's what we do. How do we deal with that?
I think it's when someone actually knows some individual, when they have that face and that story to the disease versus just this thought of an illness that they're afraid of getting themselves. Everyone concern is that, when they forget something. So, like I was saying, as more people come out and share and speak up and share their story with others, it can, I know that person, you know what, and you know what, it's not funny to make that joke because they now have an individual person or a family associated with that versus just this theory of this disease or this concept.
And I would say one of the things that we incorporate into many of our programs, including our upcoming forum, is we always have volunteers who have a diagnosis of the disease who participate in those programs and do share their stories. So we usually have what we call a champion person who will take part in that forum and will share their story for the individuals who are attending, and so that people can put a face with the disease, and kind of personalize it. And if all of our education programs, if you watch them on demand, on our website, or if you attend one in person, all of our education presentations incorporate video interviews with individuals who have the disease. And I think people, I know I'm always surprised myself, even after all these years, when you see one of our volunteers who has a diagnosis and is living with the disease, and you hear them share their story, oftentimes you sit back and you go, wow, I would never think he has the disease. He's so well-spoken, or he's so, and I think people, it's really eye-opening to hear someone who's actually living with the disease share their story.
So it's interesting because after this conversation, I have a doctor's appointment. But I also remember, and you can probably help me out here, when I've had to take several tests, I guess cognitive tests. So you take several steps and then you give some words, you have to say those words backwards, those kind of things. Is that also another indication as to where your mind may be? I think I did pretty good the last time, but can you spell this word backwards, or walk this distance, and how long it takes, those kind of things? Is that something you do with patients as well?
So that's something that happens in that primary care office. And so as part of the annual Medicare wellness visit, there are cognitive screening questions they will do. So it's normal to be having that in a Medicare wellness visit. But the doctors will often do those cognitive assessments to get a baseline of what someone's memory is, so they can see if there's changes later on. Yes, that's common.
And sometimes those baseline tests will also give the clinicians a sense of a person's recall. Because when Christina was talking about those 10 warning signs, and you talk about the memory loss, it's different when we misplace our keys, or temporarily can't find something. But in a healthy aging brain, we still have the ability to recall. And so a lot of those early cognitive screening tests are looking for that recall. Can the person still recall those 3 words at the end of the visit that they were given at the beginning? And the walking and the balance, as dementias progress, and is true of Alzheimer's as well, the symptoms and the changes that the person experiences go beyond simple memory loss. When you're talking about the brain and all that the brain controls for our body, as a person progresses in the disease, they will have issues with balance. They will have issues with depth perception and those kind of things.
So here again at the church, names, and do I forget a name, at that point, and then you have to, okay, let me think about it for a few moments. How does one keep their mind kind of functioning to the extent that they're doing recall, trying to remember everything? Is there any kind of pattern that you could work there?
So keeping our brains active, one of the important things is to not just live with names and recall, but is to challenge our minds in a different way. So not just doing a Sudoku word find over and over again, but doing something your brain's not familiar with. So, learning a new language just for fun, even if you're not going to master it and become fluent in it. I always say brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand, going back over with the dominant so we have good oral hygiene. Taking a new path driving, but your brain's creating new pathways and new synapses there to help. It's not going to prevent the decline that's already happening, but it'll build more connections that Alzheimer's would have to go through, destroy.
I often use when over the years, as I've done different education programs myself with caregivers and individuals in the community, I often use the example, to Christina's point, we're creatures of habit, right? Mm-hmm. So I get up in the morning, I come down the stairs, I make a left, I go to the coffee machine, I make my coffee. A lot of that I can do without really thinking about it because it's habitual. If we go every day from home to our office or home to church or home to the grocery store, have you ever had that moment when you get to your destination and you realize you don't really recall the stop signs, the traffic lights. It's routine and it's habitual. So one way to challenge my brain and to keep it more active and exercising is if I were to come down the steps in the morning and turn right, just for something different. If I came down the steps and turned right, it would cause my brain to pause and say, wait a minute, we always go left to the coffee machine. So folding the socks a different way, from right to left instead of left to right, or, just changing up the routine now and then can just help the brain stay a little sharper, and challenge the brain.
I'm going to share a secret with you. I use a manuscript. There's no way I would call myself a skilled orator, but I work at it, and I use a manuscript. However, when it comes to doing a eulogy, I have chosen not to use a manuscript, but to speak from my heart and my mind, and so I have to consciously think about 15 minutes what I'm going to say without being redundant, and that has helped me to some degree. Because it keeps my mind sharp. This is what you're going to say, and I've been doing that for a number of years. I'm hoping that keeps my mind, And there are times when, even as we're doing now, I'm not using a manuscript. I'm just kind of, letting it flow, because I think again, one of the challenges of technology, as good as it is, if we're not careful, it will take away the mind. And I don't think people realize that. We depend more on this device than we are on our minds. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with it. I was always the sticky note person, having to remember and reminders, and now my phone dings and reminds me I have a calendar reminder, and it takes away from that. I see the sharpness not as there for myself. So even little things, I can get it back right away, but technology is taking that a little bit from us. And so we have to be proactive, I think, for all of us, no matter what our age is, to do things out of routine and things to make our brains think differently to stay sharp.
I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that I think the upcoming holiday season is a great time to really, I was just reading a blog today by a woman who has young onset and is in the early stages, and she was talking about the changes that she's preparing for the upcoming holiday season, because she won't be able to do all that she has always done for the holidays, all the cooking and things that she's always been the matriarch of handling. And what really struck me is at the end of her interview, she said she encouraged others this holiday season to put down the phones and look at each other and talk to each other and have conversations, and most importantly, to listen and listen to each other. And that just really struck me, because we do that. I see my children do it. We're all guilty of it, of being on the phone and half listening and not, paying attention. And when you're impacted by a situation like this, and a disease like this, you really need to listen. You really need to know where the person is at and what they need, in any moment. And so you really do need to really pay attention and listen.
If I would ask you to sum up in your mind, your heart, the basic things we need to know about this illness, what would you say?
I say that you're not alone. You should reach out for help. You should join the person in their world or their reality. So wherever they think they are in their mind, if they're 20 years old, wherever they're living, you should join them there and help them reminisce and be there versus pulling them out of that reality, because it can be very upsetting. And I think the last thing I would say is remember that a lot of communication is nonverbal. So emphasizing using gestures and conscious of our tone of voice and our facial expressions when we're interacting with someone who's living with that disease is just as important as to what we're saying verbally to them, and can impact how they respond and the quality of their care.
What would you say?
And I would add to that, and I would agree with everything, the points that Christina has made, and I would add to that, as I referenced earlier, is for people to have a more, I don't know if positive is the right word, but to look at Alzheimer's and dementia differently. Because I think as a society, with the stigma and all the other things that we've talked about, we tend to look at Alzheimer's and dementia in a very negative way. And so if we, hear that someone has been diagnosed, we think doom and gloom or death sentence, or we don't. I would encourage people to think about it as they do other chronic illnesses, and to know that there is life after diagnosis with Alzheimer's and dementia. And it's really, the focus should be quality of life, and that the person still has a lot of living to do, and they can still enjoy taking a walk, and they can still enjoy visits with family, and they can still enjoy, their abilities will change over time as they progress, but maybe they can't cook the meal, but they can set the table. They can still help with the dishes. They can still, how do we keep our loved ones engaged despite the disease, and that there's, still a lot of life to be lived after diagnosis.
There's moments of joy.
There's moments of joy. Yeah. So again, every illness is not the same. Is that correct?
Correct. With Alzheimer's, we say when you've seen one person with Alzheimer's,
Right.
you've seen one person with Alzheimer's. There's many great books out there, so many great books, but there isn't a manual that someone can hand you and say, this is exactly what's going to happen when, because it's going to be different for each person.
And the disease will, because it's a disease of the brain, and over the length of the journey, it will make its way throughout the brain. The path that it takes can be different in every person. So the changes that they experience may be at different points on the timeline. As an example, I've met individuals over the years who have been diagnosed, and within the first 3 to 5 years, they lose their ability for verbal communication. And yet, I've visited with a woman who was 12 years in to her diagnosis, and she could still sit down and have a very fluid conversation with me about her late husband and his position in the military and how they entertained. So for her, the communication piece didn't set in until later. So the symptoms will be similar, but it can happen, the timeline can be different for every individual, and just how it progresses through the brain.
We could talk for hours because it's so interesting and enlightening, as well as the fact that we talk about family dynamics here. And so I'm sure that there are family members who agree and disagree about how that loved one is cared for and how they respond. And I've seen that just about every illness. And so I'm sure, given the little we know about the illness, that there are different dynamics about how families should feel. Some may feel like, let's keep it quiet, and others may feel it's overwhelming, they can't do it. I'm sure you've seen a lot yourself, but I want to thank you again for your heart and your care, and I do believe, as you already indicated, that you receive more than you give, that at the end of the day, you feel like you made some impact upon someone. And I think that's what our service to God and service to people is about. At the end of the day, that we feel like we've helped in some way. And I know you've helped myself in terms of just giving more knowledge and information about the illness itself. I wish I could say that Bethlehem is totally engaged in this ministry, but it's not. I think there's still some fear. And probably the people who probably are more inclined to respond are people who are dealing with it. And those who are not, just, it's just there, as opposed to how do we get information. And it could happen to anyone. Whether it's the minority community or other ethnicities or whatever, and I don't think, even though it's hereditary to some degree, but someone said the mind's a terrible thing to waste. That was a Negro college mission effort, but our minds are part of our existence. And when you lose that, you lose a lot. and then how families handle that, and particularly with little information we have. And so you've already in an hour given us, I'm sure, more than we probably have known before. And unless we are really engaged in that ministry itself. So before you go, tell us again one more time about the forum. We also want to, again, Deborah Stovall will be picking up the mantle to lead this ministry. And I'm hoping that perhaps this time next year we have more engagement from the church and from the community. I happen to be a trustee at Abington Hospital and Jefferson, and I know the importance of health awareness. And this is just another part of that. And I'm committed to make sure that Bethlehem is a holistic church where we embrace the mind, the body, and the soul. So again, thank you so much. So tell us once again before we leave.
Absolutely. So end of January, date to be determined, we're going to have an Alzheimer's community forum for Montgomery County. We're happy to have Bethlehem Baptist Church helping to partner for that program. And the idea is to raise awareness in the community, a little bit of education, and to hear from the community what are the needs that we can be helping to meet in Montgomery County. So I hope that everyone will engage to attend, whether it be in person or virtual, to share their ideas, their connections, their thoughts, so that we can effectively serve Montgomery County and those families here that are dealing with that.
Well, before we leave, I have a word of prayer, but it's been proven that persons with faith are able to handle illnesses much more readily than those who have no faith. And so whether or not, again, it's not a death sentence, could be years, that person would have a productive life to some degree. So let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this conversation. We thank you for the Alzheimer's Association and its efforts, oh God, to bring awareness and health and healing to your people. We pray for caretakers. We pray, oh God, this church might truly be engaged in this ministry. We might make a difference even as we prepare for the forum and other opportunities here with this ministry. We thank you for Deacon Dolores Parks and now for Debbie and others who will pick up the mantle and help bring about, oh God, change and awareness. So we ask your blessings upon all of those now who are affected by this illness. We thank you, God, looking forward to research that will help us, oh God, to find a way to bring about some healing and some relief for this illness. We know that it's possible because we've seen other illnesses that have been helped by research and by medical advancement. So we ask thy blessings down upon these two women of God who serve with a willing heart, a tender heart, and a caring heart. All these blessings and many more we ask